Hi, I'm Nathan Perry, and this is the Perry Breakdown. Today we're going to be breaking down literacy and what makes a good literate being. First, literacy is the ability to read and write effectively, as well as think critically about messages that are conveyed. Messages can take many forms, such as books, newspapers, verbal conversations, as well as media forms, such as movies and television commercials. People are not born literate. They have to learn literacy and communication. Therefore, we need good teachers with good teaching strategies that can help students to become literate. Now I want to discuss some aspects of literacy and how we as teachers can help students to become literate. Before we can teach students to read and write, we need to motivate them to become literate. We need this motivation to be intrinsic motivation, which means we want students to want to read for the sake of reading itself and not so that they can get a good grade in your classroom or pass a test. Some ways that we can promote motivation in the classroom are as follows. First, we can model what good literacy looks like by reading with the rhythm and flow of the language and reading expressively so that our students can be aware of how it should be read. We also should model an interest in reading, and we should talk with our students about the books that we choose to read in our free time and why we choose them so that they can see examples of people reading outside of school for fun. Secondly, we need to give students time. We should give them time to read for fun outside of class materials. We should also give them time to talk with their friends about what they're reading, because the opportunity to discuss what they think their character might do in the next chapter or express their sorrow for the lost character that they read earlier in the week is a great motivating factor to allow students to want to read. Thirdly, you should give students choice over what they read for their free time. You should look into the students' interests, and you should try to pick books that fall under categories of things that they like and enjoy. And you should also try to get feedback from your students and see, are your students enjoying what you're picking out for them? Are the books too easy? Are they too hard? Things like that, so that you can make better selections next time that you get books for your students. In giving your students choice, you also should give them a variety of books that they can have to read. A variety of texts would include teacher-made work, student-made work, as well as published work. And under published work, you should try to give them examples of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, as well as the many other types of texts that are out there, so that they can be exposed to the diverse texts that are out there for them to read. Lastly, you should promote literacy by having a classroom that promotes reading and literacy. And ways that you can do that is by putting up posters in your classroom and student work so that they can have something to be proud of and that they can have a positive environment that says, hey, I want to come here and I want to read today. You should also, if possible, have an area in your classroom that is designated a quiet and comfy area for reading so that students can escape the daily hassles and have an area that they can go to and enjoy reading. And now that I've talked about ways to motivate students to be good literate beings, I would like to discuss some aspects of literacy, which are vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension, and how these all tie together to form good literacy. First, vocabulary is the knowledge of words. And I would say that vocabulary is the foundation for good literacy, and here's why. In order to read fluently, you need to have a good understanding of the words and be able to identify words very quickly. Also, in order to comprehend what you are reading, you need to understand the meaning of the words that make up what you're reading so that you can put together the full picture. An activity that you can work on with your students to help them increase their vocabulary falls under the realm of word study instruction. And word study instruction is simply actively working with your students to understand the composition and meaning of individual words. And activities like this would be a word web where you can have your students sort by rhyming words, or you can have them sort them by words that are have similar phonemes, or you can have them sort words that have similar prefixes and suffixes. And this gets them experience with identifying similar words and also organizing the relationship between these words and how they relate to one another. Now that I've discussed vocabulary, I would like to discuss fluency. Fluency is the ability to read accurately, smoothly, and with expression. And one part of fluency is prosody, and prosody is reading with the rhythm and expression of language. And this is something that ties back into modeling and motivation. And if you are reading in your classroom with the proper prosody of the English language, then you will be displaying for your students how that should sound, and they will have an example to go off of when they're thinking in their head of how to read something. Another skill that your students need to have to be fluent readers is decoding, and that is they need to be able to figure out what words are that they don't know. Some things that you can give your student, tools that will help them with decoding words are, first, you can teach them how to find the meaning of a word based on the context of a sentence. You can also teach them how to figure out unknown words by comparing and relating them to words that they already know. Fluency ties in with vocabulary, because if you have a higher vocabulary, like I said, then you will be able to be a more fluent reader. Fluency also ties into comprehension, because the more fluently you are able to read, the more words you will be able to read at one time. Therefore, you will be able to comprehend more. An activity that you can do to work with your students on fluency is called choral reading. And choral reading works like this. First, the teacher picks a passage such as a short poem or a piece of a story, and they read that aloud to their class with the proper prosody and expression that they should. Then they have the students practice reading it all together in unison multiple times. This allows the students to not only practice reading, but hear how their peers are practicing, and they can adjust what they are doing based on what they hear their peers doing, as well as trying to self-correct. After you have had them practice reading, you can also talk about the meaning of the piece that you read. So if it's a poem, you can talk about, what happened and what is the meaning of the poem. And this helps the students with comprehension, which leads me to my next point, and that is comprehension. Comprehension is the last part of making up literacy. And comprehension is the understanding of the text. And here's how comprehension ties into everything else. If you have a higher vocabulary and that you understand what the meaning and are able to recognize lots of words, then you are able to read fluently, so that you're able to read many words at one time, then you are able to focus less on those two and more on the category of comprehension and understanding what it is that you are actually reading. An activity that you can do to work with your students on comprehension is the use of felt stories. And an example of this would be if you read the story Goldilocks and the Three Bears with your classroom. Then after reading the story, you can give them the felt pieces to the story Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and you can have them retell and recount the actions of the story, so that they are working on their understanding and comprehension of the events that are taking place. And now that I have talked to you about the three aspects of literacy, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension, and how they all tie in together to make the overall arching category of literacy, I would like to talk about two more aspects of literacy, and that is teaching literacy to English language learning students and also using technology in your classroom. English language learning students, or ELL students, have a greater challenge than that of English-speaking students in school, and that is not only are they trying to learn the subjects such as math, science, social studies, they are trying to learn a new language as a way of doing that. And this poses extra challenges because they have to not only decode and decipher a text, but then they have to figure out how to apply it. Some ways that we can help ELL students with literacy is as follows. First, we should always try to include the students' culture and their home culture. Culture is not something we can escape because the students spend a majority of their time in their culture. So we should embrace their culture and try to find books and stories that apply to their life so that they can be more motivated to want to learn. Secondly, we can use what is known as the Rosetta Stone technique. And this works as follows. If you have a piece that you want your student to read in English and do, you can help them and scaffold them by giving them that same piece in their native language. Then they are able to compare and look at them, and they can start picking patterns for themselves. And it helps them to better accommodate the English language into their repertoire. Thirdly, you can try to use the 20% rule. And how the 20% rule works is it's a guesstimation. It's not always accurate, but they say that about 20% of languages overlap with one another. So you can use similar sounding words or similarly spelled words from another language to help scaffold your student into learning English. And an example of this would be if you were trying to teach a primarily German-speaking student how to say brother, their word for brother is Bruder. So it is very similar, and so that would maybe be one of the first scaffolding words you would want to use to help your student learn English, because then they're going to have success and then they'll be further motivated to do better. Lastly, you should always make sure that you are giving your students time. You want to give all students time to accomplish their work, but ELL students need that extra special time because before performing what it is that you are asking them to do, they have to first decipher and understand what they're reading. And depending on their ability level, some students will definitely need more time than others. Now that I've talked about how to help English language learning students, I want to talk about using technology in the classroom. We are teaching for the future as teachers because our students are not going to grow up and live in today's world. They are going to grow up and they are going to live as adults in the future. And technology is the future, unless of course there's a zombie apocalypse, but I don't think that's very likely. Therefore, since we need to teach for the future and use technology, we need to start using tools such as smart boards, computers, and iPads. These things and give students familiarity with how to use things such as touch screens, keyboards, mics, how to navigate a program. And it's also fun and interesting because you can get sounds and effects and motion involved in it as opposed to just writing on paper and using a chalkboard. You can make it way more interesting. There's a lot of stuff you can do with that. In summary, I would like to say, as teachers, we need to motivate our students to be literate beings. We need to help them to want to become good readers. We also need to teach them good vocabulary, good fluency, and good comprehension, because these three categories together come together as a puzzle to make literacy and help students to be good literate beings. Also, we need to keep in mind that students need extra time sometimes to get things done, especially if English is not their first language. And finally, we need to make sure that as teachers, we are teaching for the future and we are using technology to help students be very familiar with these concepts so that one day in the future they will be very successful. And thank you for joining in for the Perry Breakdown.